Good afternoon, everybody. The Chilliwack Creative Commission is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Stalo people. And live from Studio C, welcome to Creative Third Thursdays. I'm your guest host, Tim McAlpine. And the third Thursday of the month is when we get to mingle and creative folks and focus on one of them as our featured creative. I'm usually in the control room pushing the buttons and very comfortable in the dark, but I'm on stage today, so I recruited a suitable replacement. And Elise, if you show yourself on screen here. Elise McAlpine, no relation, is working the cameras, audio and lights today, and thank you very much, Elise. We met in the hall. For more information about this and future events, make sure to go to creativethirdthursdays.com. That's mostly for you guys on YouTube because these guys all got tickets through there. So, for more about our sponsoring organization, the Chilliwack Creative Commission, visit businessinchilliwack.com, and that's an arm of SEPCO, the Chilliwack Economic Partners Corporation. There will be a test after to link all of these things together. We have a hashtag that's been going for years now, Creative Chilliwack. So if you're snapping pictures or wanting to see what's going on in this industry, by all means, follow that. So now, let's meet this month's featured creative by way of a clip from one of his recent podcast episodes. I want you to notice the important person in the video and the very fact that I'm dressed in the video as if I'm going to Hawaii for a vacation.
Politics, for me, my experience has been you think you're going in to do one job and something else happens, events take place, and the challenge is maintaining the focus on why you went. And for me, it's always been housing.
Can you reflect on your journey so far in politics in BC? Obviously, housing is a top priority for so many people as housing minister. And what you learned during that time, how do you process during that storm of reaction whether or not you're on the right track or not, or whether or not there's too much political pressure to continue?
There wasn't a single new school built in Surrey in the last 4 years of the BC Liberal government under John Rustad and Kevin Falcon. Recognizing high title for the first time outside of a court process for a government to do that in British Columbia. Your message of individual responsibility is a really important one, but I think that government's role is to clear as much of the path as we can for people. Having to take that step back and say, we have to take a different approach here to recriminalize public drug use, really difficult and necessary.
Andrew Weaver wrote a pretty harsh piece on you. He criticized the healthcare under your leadership and your fiscal policies. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Today's episode is made possible in part by support from Enbridge, fueling quality of life in British Columbia for over 65 years.
Premier, it is an honor to speak with you today. I'm very grateful you were able to take the time. First, would you mind introducing yourself?
My name is David Eby. I'm the Premier of British Columbia, and really glad to be here, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
Aaron Pete is the host of the Bigger Than Me podcast and a returning guest to Creative Third Thursdays. This time around, we're going to dig deep into what's involved in producing a successful interview-style video and audio podcast. And raised by a single Indigenous mother with a disability, Aaron has a deep appreciation for the value of community and uses his platform to inspire and uplift others. He is a graduate of the Peter A. Allard School of Law, not to be confused with the Peter B. Allard School of Law, and serves as Strategic Relationship Manager for the Métis Nation British Columbia. And in September 2022, Aaron was elected as the council member for his community, Chawathil First Nation. Come on out, Aaron. How many of you folks know Aaron? Pretty much everybody. We're going to forego the lead up the life story. You can watch the past episodes that he's done on Creative Third Thursday for that. But we're just going to kind of mark a moment in time right now. And what I want to just reflect on before we dig into it is this monumental accomplishment that you somehow pulled off. Tell us about what this is and what went on.
I had the opportunity to interview all of the party leaders leading up to the election. I reached out to them well before we knew the election was going to take place and got to get to know each one of them individually in a long-form setting.
What was super interesting is you pressed them pretty hard. So, for instance, with John Rustad and Kevin Falcon, they had some long-standing beef, and you kind of dug into that, and both kind of swore, we will never get together. This will never happen. And then like a week later, it just all collapsed. And so that was quite something.
There was something weird about the fact we recorded in August, knowing we were planning to drop in September. And once we started to see sort of the dominoes start to fall, we knew we needed to turn this around a little bit faster because the political landscape was shifting quite a bit. And the day before Kevin Falcon resigned was the day we released the episode with him. And we were holding it for like 3 weeks.
Right.
And so I got one good day out of the Kevin Falcon interview.
And I was cooking dinner and had Global News on, and out of the corner of my eye, it was like, is that my studio? And they'd taken a clip from it where they said, never in a million years would we ever get together and unite. So anyways, that was a landmark. And like, just do you slide into their DMs? Like, how do you get these guys and women?
It started off with David Eby. I reached out to his team in March and just started the conversation, just opened up. And then I do follow-up emails to check in and make sure it made it to them. Sometimes it goes into the spam folders. So followed up. And then I got a call one day when I was out looking into water systems in Chawathil. And it was one of their team members saying, we're very interested in doing this interview. We're coming through. It'll be a few months until we're in your area, but we're very interested and we'd be happy to arrange this. And for these interviews specifically, I reassured them there'd be B-roll footage we'd be recording. We'd have a photographer. We'd have a whole setup for their team so that they knew it wasn't just us in a rinky-dink space. We were going to take this really seriously. So that was kind of the promise to them.
In the control room, I've got a bunch of cameras, and there's one that's in the kitchen, just not that I'm spying on you guys before this, but
he is.
But I could see two like Secret Service guys that were packing heat and basically scrolling TikTok. So here we are, 4 years in, 183 episodes.
We're like 4 years and 10 months. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, we're March is the 5-year mark.
First typo already.
Yeah.
But you're getting to the 5-year mark.
Yeah.
And so do refresh us on the origins of how this thing started.
I was driving back and forth from here out to Peter Allard School of Law and listening to a ton of podcasts. And I didn't want to stay on campus. So I was driving 5 days a week, listening to 6-7 hours of podcasts a day and really getting interested in and realizing that I was interested in so much more than I realized. And that this medium really allows anybody, when you're a listener, to learn about topics you never think might engage you, and that there's so many different topics that you can take an interest in. And then I sort of realized that there's not anybody locally that I was listening to that was kind of hitting on the people that I thought were inspiring or interesting or conversations I'd like to see happen. So it was the day of the everything was shutting down in 2020, and I remember calling Rebecca and my buddy Jake and saying, I think I can do this. I think this is something I'd be interested in. Originally, it was going to be Jake and I recording it together, and then we pivoted shortly after to me doing it alone and started scheduling guests and ordering all the podcast equipment, microphones and cameras and everything. And it was about a $2,500 investment from day one while I was in university, making not a lot of money to kind of commit to this. And I really wanted to make sure that I followed through on it. So I developed plans, visions, started trying to come up with names, and I said that I wouldn't be done until that I reached a certain goal. And I didn't kind of specifically define what that was going to be, but I knew that it needed to be like a long run, that I had a buddy reach out and say, I'm doing the same thing. And he never did episode 1. And so I knew that there was this curse of you don't start, you don't follow through, you don't book your guests, you don't keep it up. And then it just kind of becomes this thing where you had 4 episodes and you didn't follow through. And I was always cognizant of that and running from that all throughout. And I didn't give myself a break until probably around the time we started working together in this space, because I was so worried that one day I'm not going to book someone, then I'm going to get busy, then I'm going to put it on the back burner.
Cool. Well, we will go forward, but Jake, where did you bury the body? Why did that not happen?
That's gruesome, but There's a lot of, I think, factors that go into like, who do you want to speak to? And all of my favorite shows that I was listening to, it was one-on-one.
Got it.
And so then you look at scheduling, then you're trying to figure out a space. We have different approaches. And I've just watched so many people try and do a duo, and one person wants to ask, and then they get kind of caught in who's going to ask the next question, and it becomes bumpy. And I think when people are listening to long form, they need to be able to hit play and take their hands off and not have to worry. And that's one challenge. When you're listening and it's bumpy, it's very hard to stay engaged. You start going, I just kind of want to listen. You want to be able to drive on an hour drive and not have to worry about whether or not you're going to be interested or engaged. And that was a huge factor going into that early days.
So you started almost 5 years ago, but you started with audio only, and you mentioned some of the gear you bought. I see a couple Rode podcast mics, and Scarlett little USB interface was in there, and you dressed up a spare room in your apartment and did a really good job of it.
Thanks.
And so this was episode 17 is when you started video, and that was John Haidt.
Yep.
How many have heard of John Haidt? That's what I thought. And then your latest guest,
Poor
I'm
guy.
not sure. How many of you have heard of this guy? Show of hands? Pretty much, yes, Rick Hansen. So, but that's quite the progression. And tell us about starting at the home studio, the pros and cons of self-producing, of being a one-man band entirely. Like, what did you love about that?
Well, just quickly, like one of the things I'll always hold dear is being able to interview the people that people don't know. And when those episodes do well, like that's an honor to me, because it's a lot easier to market a Rick Hansen interview just with the name. That's easy. Getting somebody that people don't know and making it engaging enough for people to want to listen to, that's when you've made a difference. That's when you've contributed from my perspective as a host. So I think that's really important, and something that I try and follow through on is continue to get people don't know about. And if I see downloads and interest in those, that's when I'm like, wow, this is an honor, because people are trusting me that the topic's interesting, or they're trusting me as the host to kind of deliver on something where they don't know. I do that all the time with podcasts that I'm looking at. Like, I don't know if this is going to be interesting, and I trust the host to kind of figure that out on my behalf. But the studio, doing it myself, was like a huge learning experience, trying to figure out audio and going through Audacity and trying to edit things, trying to deal with plosives, which I'm sure you deal with all the time. When people start spitting and that starts coming through the mic, like that's no dice for people. So like those are the things you're dealing with when you're on your own, and then you're just sitting there in the back of your mind, is this recording? Is this recording properly? And like taking your hand, and I did have one episode, and our photographer right here was the poor victim of me messing that up. The only time I did it, but we went out, it was on the water along the Fraser River, and we did 3 hours, and it was so interesting, and I didn't get any audio. And so we just have a great time of us just sitting there for 3 hours straight. So he came back in and we did it in studio, and I had everything set up. But those are like the stresses when you're in the space. And then we got flooded out of our apartment, and we had to rush off to another place. And so we had to redesign the whole studio in a new space and go through those processes. And that's when you and I connected.
Got it. And just for those counting at home, I've already thrown Jake and John under the bus. We'll see where the body count lands at the end here. So, but that really explains that, because you mentioned having this flood, and I had run into you, I had heard of you, and we connected. You reached out and said, I've got this. Ironically,
hey man, I interviewed you. What? We ran into each other? I interviewed you.
Yeah, I tend to block out like 3 hours in the sun, because that's what you made me do.
Yeah.
Back in the day, your initial thesis was, I wanted to grind these people into the ground and do a 3.5 hour interview with them. You've changed that a little bit, but my apologies. But Henry Braun became quite notable because he was the Abbotsford mayor at the time of the atmospheric river craziness, and somehow again you got him on but the total ironic part is you were interviewing him about a flood, and then your apartment flooded.
That's true. I've never put those pieces together.
With nothing to do with, it was a sprinkler, not a atmospheric river.
Yeah.
But, and you reached out and said, I've got this opportunity. Could I use your space? And I was gung-ho to try, and it was really good.
Yeah.
And so you made the switch. in November, a few months later, to make this your permanent home. And one of the key things with that is you expressed interest in, I would like to be able to not just have people in studio. Is there a way that we can do remote contribution?
Yeah.
And so that's when, like, this space really worked well for that. And so what you see is Aaron sitting in that podcast studio over there, but looking into a teleprompter, and that's what he sees Zoom on. And so you get really good eye line, and he can put little cheat notes and stuff on the side and stuff like that. But so you made that move, but that's money. That you had it all set up at home. Was there a lot of contemplation on your part of doing this? Or was it a test run? Were we just dating? Like, what was going on?
So they're dead people now. We're dating. I don't know what's going on with this interview. No, I don't think there was any hesitation, because the big challenge that I had in the space we were in during that period was I just didn't feel like it was delivering the quality that I was looking for. And we were doing everything we could to try and up the quality, but I was using camcorders that were recording pretty mediocre quality. And then we'd try and turn that into Instagram Reels and stuff, and they just looked really grainy and not where I wanted the product to be. And I wanted, for so many of our guests, like, I wanted them to be able to have something they could be proud of in 10 years and look back on. And I knew I wasn't delivering that. So it wasn't a lot of hesitation to switch. And it also was a huge challenge trying to get other guests that weren't local or that kind of viewed the commute out from Vancouver or other areas as a challenge. And this really just opened the door to who I could interview, because now we've interviewed people in Australia.
Mm-hmm. So that's some backstory, just to get you guys up to speed on where we're at, but what you're here for and why it intrigued you. Yes, he's a beautiful man and takes a great photo, but you're here to learn. You're here to learn the secrets of how to grow a successful podcast. And so we're going to dig deep and try to pull that out. Sure. I love Chelsea. She's my number one. So first off, when we think of podcast, it's derived from the iPod, and at the time it was entirely audio. This is now going back more than 20 years ago. Yeah. But over time it's really shifted, and there's a mix of different types of podcasts. And so I think what we're going to find today is we're going to talk a lot about video, because that's where you put a lot of your energy, but I'm going to pull audio into it as well, because you're still doing both, right? But on that note, what's your preference, like audio or video or a combination of both?
I think you need to put audio first when you're interviewing. Like, you need to have that as your focus, that people are driving down the road. If you're not doing that smoothly, you're not going to have listeners on audio, because it's not like deliberate, but I think people have like a real taste and preference that they can tune in and they can just let their phone go and they can just enjoy the conversation or the topic that's being covered. And so you can get away with a lot more on video by engaging people's eyes in a way you can't get away with mm-hmm. audio. And just on your point about podcasts, I think podcasts are probably the wrong name for it today, because it's just not reflective of the space that it's in. Like, people say, like, I have a podcast, kind of sounds like you have two mics in your closet, mm-hmm. and I did at one point in time, but like, I think the space has changed a lot, and so I don't know if I love the term podcast anymore, mm-hmm. because I just don't think it's reflective of what's kind of going on in the medium.
Yeah, and even Apple discontinued the iPod. Like, it doesn't even exist as a product anymore, right? Yeah. And as I was doing research for this, I was Googling things like what's more popular, audio or video. And over the years, audio was definitely the preference. But as of today, depending on the source, it was around 40 to 45% prefer video, 50 to 55% prefer audio, and it's that passive nature of it, that you can drive, you can walk, etc. But more and more, especially as YouTube has adopted podcasting, and you can use playlists actually to create an RSS feed and so forth. Video is becoming on strong. So we'll use those interchangeably as we rifle through these sections. And as you've seen, there's many, many different platforms, but and then you also have to contribute to them, especially on the audio side. What product do you use to do that? Like
Buzzsprout.
Right.
Buzzsprout is the platform that I use for the audio interface, and it puts it out to all of these. So I don't have to worry about those details. It's going out to all of these different supporters.
And which one's performing best on the audio side?
Apple Podcasts for sure.
Really?
Yeah, Apple Podcasts by it's like 80%. 80% of my listeners are on Apple Podcasts. 10% Spotify, which is interesting because when I've polled multiple times over the years what people say on Instagram, and what people say on Instagram is always Spotify, but that's not. I switched over to Spotify's host, thinking because they were going to incorporate video and they were going to start doing transcripts that I'd see a lot more success on Spotify, and that never materialized. So I switched back to Buzzsprout.
And when you look at your overall analytics and compare, what's performing better, video or audio?
Depends on what you mean by perform, because
views or listens, just straight up.
Oh, YouTube easily, because you can catch people with that thumbnail. A lot of people might not know, but like they've done a lot with podcasts recently. You can adapt the cover photo so people can see the face. Because one challenge that so many hosts have is I might interview somebody really interesting, but they know the face, they don't know the name, and so that piece has become a really important part. But what I would say is like the contrast to that is for podcasts, you get a really engaged listener. Like my stats on how engaged my listeners are really high, and so I'm getting somebody for the full interview. I don't have to worry about that. Where YouTube, you can see that you've got a ton of views, but that drop-off point at the 9th minute is the usual point at which people stop listening and stop engaging with the interview.
And Buzzsprout you've been happy with as a platform, essentially? And
by miles. They have tutorials on like challenges you're facing, how to name episodes. They have an AI piece to them that will go through your interview, kind of help you with the descriptions, help you with titles and stuff, help you write blog posts. I've never had a response within that's taken longer than 2 hours for them to update me if there's an issue or if I have a question. They're very responsive and super supportive. You do have to pay for them. There are free versions, but I just find their level of service and quality and the information I get through their newsletters and stuff well worth the price.
All right, so we know what's most popular and how you're hosting audio. Next up, defining your niche and goals.
How did you do that?
I'm going to challenge you on this one because it's super interesting that you've been so successful, but you're kind of all over the map.
Thanks.
But I went and I looked through and I put them into buckets. And I guess they all fit in the bigger than me and the curiosity and so forth. But you've had tremendous success. When you look at some, this is going to all be about hockey or it's going to be current events. But you've really been able to flex your curiosity and just go where it takes you. So you've got journalists. One thing that's interesting as well is your thumbnail game has risen over the years.
Thanks.
You're getting really good at designing and posting those, and you have kind of a look now. But you'll see some of the older ones where you've experimented. Politicians and...
I don't know if Dan Austenbrink counts as a politician.
Okay, we'll update that in post. I was moving stuff around, obviously. No, he does not. He's in the entrepreneur one as well.
Yeah.
So politicians, academics, and authors, those could be two categories. Yeah. You've got rap and hip hop.
Yeah.
Boy, that took a left turn.
Yeah.
But these are all scratching itches that you've got. 100%. And you've been able to, in every category, really get high-profile guests. And again, it's just, we'll get into how you're getting these guests because I'm super curious. UFC fighters is another one.
Yeah.
He's a hoot, Amon.
He's my man. Yeah.
And he's probably right now the most successful Canadian UFC.
Yeah, he's got a 4-fight win streak, and that's ever since he came on the podcast.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course.
I'm not taking responsibility. It's just interesting stat.
Entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
There he is in the right spot.
There you go.
Health and well-being.
Yeah.
A guest of yours sitting in the front row right here.
There you go. Honored. Thank you for coming.
Yeah. Indigenous leaders, you've got a lot of those.
Yeah.
And have done just tremendous work shedding light on so many really important subjects and people, and it's been really interesting for me. I'm in the control room. I don't have to listen or watch any of these because I'm there for them. And the process that we employ is it's live to tape. Essentially, I've got over there's 6 cameras, or if it's a remote one, we've got basically 3 shots, one of air and one of guest, one together. and then I'm just listening and cutting when appropriate. And if I did my job right, it's done at the end. I might make a couple notes of, he's pretty stoic, so I always have him in this other screen. Okay, give me a laugh, buddy. Give me a laugh. Cut. so sometimes when I don't get those, I'll go back and
for their benefit, there was one interview we did where the person was like, "Are you frozen?" And I was like, "No, I'm just sitting really still."
But other folks I've worked with, there are retakes. Literally, in more than 2.5 years, I hit record, I hit stop, and it goes. And there's literally no, I need to cut this section out or I need to move this. It's remarkable. So
You shouldn't need it if the conversation's authentic. If you genuinely want to know the answer, you shouldn't need retakes.
Oh, I'm going to cut the hell out of this thing today.
I'm sure. But that's because you're your own worst enemy. But like being able to like really like get into the conversation where you're lost in that and not on what's being recorded. That's the secret sauce. Is like if you're all in, you don't have to worry about anything else because you're focused on what's at hand and not worried about any other things going on.
Yeah, and that also doing that technique, if you're thinking about it, like you were doing 2.5, 3 hour interviews in your home studio, hitting record on 2 or 3 cameras, and then probably spending 6 or 7 hours of editing afterwards for every episode. Right?
It was usually my whole weekend. We would just sit there for 8 hours a day working on it.
So if you are doing multi-camera, definitely cut live if you can. Yeah. And then there's corner gas. You know, that's another category. He's working on the 5th in this set. It's pretty amazing. And so when Brett Butt shows up on your Zoom screen and you're looking at it, it was just wild, like just absolutely wild. And that one is just pure gold with how it finished and everything.
Agreed.
Yeah. And well, we won't reveal that just yet.
Oh, you can. I don't know if they'll know who he is, but the guy who plays Oscar is who I'm scheduling with right now.
Yeah. And then you've got a bunch of random stuff, mostly with your friend Tim. So that's the collection amongst these 183.
Yeah.
But when I look at and I sort on YouTube by most popular, they do form a bucket. And I also see that it's really ramping up for you. You've got close to 700,000 views on YouTube now, and I would say like 500,000 of them in the last year. Yeah, so it's really
That's
ramping
crazy.
up.
Yeah. Thank you.
But my question it begs the question, do you ever feel like you will niche down or specialize, like in politicians and journalists?
No.
The
main reason being is like that's what you'll read anywhere you read it is niche down, figure out what your spot is. But if that's not going to be interesting to you in 2 years, then you are giving yourself basically a runway on when the end date is, because there's only so many people within that niche that is going to interest you. And it's like, this is great, but like, how do I make those other interviews blow up? How do I make those more engaging? What is it about those that aren't as interesting? Like, yes, this is clearly the path. If I just wanted to keep getting views, it would be on politics, it would be on division, it would be on issues facing Canada. Those are what catch people and get people to watch, and they get mad and they leave comments and they call me an idiot. And it's fantastic.
You've got hundreds of comments on some of these.
Yeah, that I'm a shill for the CBC and all types of things. Yeah. But like that won't sustain over the long term, or there's always going to be another issue, or it's going to leak into my head that this is where the world is. And I don't think this is where the world is. When you start speaking to Rick Hansen, he couldn't care less about any of this. And that's so interesting that you can have such a driven, thoughtful person who's inspired, no offense to these people, but inspired more people than these people could ever inspire. And he's just doing his own thing, and he's not worked up about things. And I think being able to kind of go, okay, this is done well, now I can go focus on another topic that's really interesting, has allowed me to last 5 years where other people kind of go, I've covered, if you do hockey, I've covered all the people I want to speak to in this niche. And then you kind of give yourself like how long can you sustain that for before you're kind of tired of hockey, or before you want to talk about something else?
So people must ask you, hey, you've got a successful podcast, I'm thinking about starting. How would you counsel them in that respect? Would you tell them to maybe specialize, or how would you? Don't think of yourself per se, because I think that's a bit of an anomaly. Yeah. Just because it's been great content, you have all the other characteristics. But do you believe in specialization for some folks?
Absolutely. I would ask them, like, where do you want to take this? What is the thing that's calling you to want to do this? And in not just the next year, because I could tell somebody how to kind of start to book these guests and go that route, but what's going to sustain you over 5 years? If this is actually something you want to commit to as a craft, what's going to engage you? And then that's going to tell you, do you niche down into the topic you're an expert in? Or are you going to get tired of that topic? Because this is always a place I can return to when work is driving me crazy, when council's driving me nuts, or like when I'm facing a lot of challenges. I can always come here and speak with interesting individuals, and that's what sustains me over the long term, is because I'm excited about who I'm going to speak to next. I sit down and go, who do I want to speak to next? And this has been my outlet for my creativity. And so if that's their outlet, then they should leave a door open. But if they're an expert in their field and they feel like a topic's not being covered, you should niche yourself down, hit that topic, and hit it really hard, because other people are likely in the same boat.
It's been really good to see you have these relationships with these folks and build that rapport and have them on again and again. Like those ones in particular were some of my favorites. So.
I'm glad. I would just say in terms of that, like this is one of the challenges I would say happens with people, is that like nobody asks people why they do what they do or why they're good at it. And that's such a missing piece of where we are right now, that like when people get asked, why do you do what you do? Why do you care about the things you care about? People go like, oh my God, I've been waiting to share this for so long. That's been like the highlight of the podcast, is people just finally feeling like they're being seen, understood, and respected for the work they're doing. Like that is not an easy job. A lot of these people, like Candice Malcolm, we disagree on so much. She's such a divisive person, but like she's doing what she believes is best. And I'm not here to debate that. I'm here to understand where she's coming from. And a lot of people are in that boat where they're trying at something and there's not a lot of recognition or support for what they're doing. And that's where the name Bigger Than Me podcast comes from, is all of these people are doing it for a greater cause. Like Dan Ostenbrink talking about like, I'm trying to fix how we do farming so we can save the land and preserve it for future generations, is like, that's a message that needs to get out to people. But like nobody ever asks, why are you running this business, man? Like, why are you doing it so hard? So really quickly, why did you start this space?
A slightly beyond midlife crisis, and it's better than a Corvette or crack cocaine.
Why does it continue?
Because I love doing it. It's a really cool thing to be involved in things like that, things like this, and it's my side hustle. Yeah. And let's flip it back to you. I'm also aware that Jeff likes to keep a tight 30 on these, but we're going to go along. I've got a few things to get through. So finding and securing guests. I think this is an overlooked piece, especially once you get into it and it's a slog and you're trying to do a weekly or bi-weekly, getting that next guest. Do you have a wish list that you're going to? Do you have templates? Like what's the secret sauce?
That was one of the big challenges, I'd say, we've been knocking off a lot of big names that have been on my dream list. And it's about keeping up to date, figuring out what other areas that I haven't explored yet to get excited about speaking with people. So right now I am in talks with Christia Freeland's team to try and book that interview. And I'm very excited about the opportunity to help form that conversation about the Liberal candidacy. I've reached out to people like Pierre Poilievre to try and start to participate in the federal discussions going on in Canada right now, as it's a huge hot topic, and I think that's moving in the right direction. But like figuring out what's going to excite you and starting to break down why you want to speak with them prior is I think really important.
And are you personally asking, or is it someone on your team that's helping with this?
Yeah, so what we changed before the David Eby interview is I'd reach out personally, and I always thought that was the best way to go about it. It's more authentic, it's honest, but I do think some people take you less seriously if it's coming from you, because then it looks like it's a one-person operation. And for some people like David Eby, they expect it's going to be some other person reaching out on the host's behalf. CTV, CBC, they're all going to have bookers that are reaching out on behalf of the show to book them. And that's one pivot we did make leading up to those interviews, is we had it actually reach out from Rebecca instead of myself. And that was just the signature was her. And I do think that was a contributing factor as to why they chose to come on.
What's your acceptance rate? Like if you send out 10 asks, how many would come back as a yes?
Oh, I'd say I'm probably batting like 80%.
Yeah.
So usually it's pretty successful. And
has that increased over the years?
No, I'd say it's decreased over the years because my aspirations are getting less realistic or less possible.
And what's in that ask? Are you sending them to particular videos you're proud of, or?
Yeah, I try. So usually it starts out with, hey, you're invited to be a guest. And then I go into, this is why we think you'd be a great fit. And then we talk a little bit about the success of the show and where we're at with numbers and stuff. That was something I didn't do for probably the first 130 episodes, is I never talked about numbers. And then I did speak to Tara Henley, who was a past guest, and just asked how does she book guests, and she did talk about how many cities, how many downloads, how many listens on average. And so I started including that information, and then logistics. And I switched from 45 minutes to 30 minutes just because 30 minutes we can get to 45 if it's a good interview, but saying 45, people don't respond as well to that.
Yeah, I have a messaging system. I can communicate with Aaron when he's on, and I'll give him a timer, and I said, you're at 30, wrap it up. And then he just is smooth talking them, and they'll go to like 50. And so, but that's a good point. Yeah, you're not looking to sit down with somebody now for hours at a time, and especially people with a very busy schedule, you're in and out and give them the link. And we're always at the top of the hour going, are they going to show? And then they pop into Zoom.
That's something about Zoom too. When you sit down and it's like 101, people are like, oh, I guess this person's not coming. And it's like, you wouldn't do that in like a person meeting if they were 1 minute late.
Yeah. And we use Zoom. There are many tools, Riverside FM and specialty tools, but I use a product called Zoom ISO. It's an add-on to Zoom that allows me to get full HD 1080 resolution, as well as independent audio, and there's no interface things that are on screen, and it's really, really good. And the nice thing about that is the guest on the other end knows how to use it. You're not teaching them or sending them to a tutorial or having them use a specific browser and so forth. So it's been pretty bulletproof on that front. But if they're on the worst Wi-Fi in a snowstorm, it's not going to work, and we've had some of those. So next up is preparing for interviews. How much preparation do you do for an interview?
I would say it depends. Like with the rappers that I've interviewed, like I'm well versed in that world. It's more about just choosing how I'm gonna approach it or what I want to cover. Like for one of them, Massive Man, like he was significantly overweight, and that was one topic that I did want to cover with him because he talks about it in his music and the bullying that he's experienced and the judgment that he receives and stuff. So like it's like, what's the thesis of the conversation? That's usually where I start, and then breaking that down into pieces of how are we going to get there. And I've tried to become more intentional with, I used to just sit down and kind of go, we're going to see where this goes, and now being more intentional because the time restraint is real, that I want to make sure that there's kind of a thesis that when I do market it, people understand what's going to be covered, and that they're kind of getting, if I say we're going to cover something, that's the meat of what we're covering.
And you've been hitting them with a more hard-pressing topical question right off the bat to get them right into it. And I think that's intentional, isn't it?
That's intentional because of that 8-minute timing on YouTube videos that you need to, like I used to start like, who are you and why are you here today? Like, what's your background? And then you, an hour in, get into the interesting depths of how they got there. And I think that taught me a lot about making people feel comfortable in the interviewing process. But the big piece now is like, you need to have, and most people that I'm interviewing now kind of get that. Like when you're interviewing a rapper, they know that kind of engaging people in the first 30 seconds is kind of key. And so asking those more engaging questions from the outset, then you can kind of go through the history or their personal circumstances. But really quickly, I didn't do that with the politicians. I made sure to humanize them first because I do think we're extremely polarized, and I wanted to introduce, this is a human being first, particularly with John Rustad, because everything I read about him in preparation was that he was a horrible, horrible person coming from a horrible, horrible place. And even going into that interview, it was a challenge to try, and I told you this before we interviewed him, I'm the most nervous for this because he could be a caricature, and I don't want to interview him as a caricature. I want to interview the person. And so it's easy when you're reading all of these terrible things, or he's a climate denier, he's anti-vaxxer, he's these things, to go in and be like, I'm going to get this guy. I'm going to catch him. And I didn't want to do that. So we spent a good 20 minutes. What's your background? I got into politics. My family and I were considering moving to Alberta. We chose to stay. I committed to trying to impact the community in a positive way. I ran on that and I got elected within my community. And now I'm trying to make BC a better place. And like, you can disagree with where he's coming from, but like, he's a person with a family and roots in the community, and he didn't do it to ruin the province. And so like, that was intentional, but a lot of the time it is trying to catch people with something interesting about the person from the outset.
Yeah, you did a really good job of that. I found myself at the end of each of them, I guess I'm going to vote green. Like, maybe I'm going to go NDP. Conservatives, not bad.
Hey man, we started with the Liberal part, the
Kevin Falcon,
okay, and
this guy's making sense.
Yeah, and you were like, why are you even bothering with this guy when we started? Because his numbers were so terrible.
So, recording and editing. I mentioned a little bit about how we do it. We've got way overkill here, but you can do it on the cheap, obviously. But what are some of the tools and software you use? So just to frame it, Aaron films and records his audio and video here. I take the core of it, do some slight edit on it, massage and EQ the audio. Then I turn it over to you. I give you the isolated files as well, and then you finish it. And so that's a nice way, I find, for us to work. It's more affordable. We're not doing all the finishing. You can spend time with it. You can cut your own shorts, etc. So with that in mind, like, what are you doing on your end?
So before I started working with you, I was using iMovie a lot. And then I did start transitioning over to Premiere Pro. And I've been with Premiere Pro ever since, which is by Adobe. And it's very simple. I have my beginning and ends, and I usually just swap it out in the middle and then just adjust the intro, which has usually their name and information in it. And it's relatively easy and quick. You do the audio file in a WAV version and put that on the podcast. And then the video version you download and upload onto YouTube.
Yes, and I share folders with them, and there's all caps, do not use, do not touch my audio, etc. Yeah. So, and it's worked out really, really well, because I think the way you're finishing and posting, and then your shorts game between you and Rebecca has just gone crazy, how good you are at it. And so, well done.
Thank you.
And that piece of it, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, what role has that played?
That's the meat and potatoes of, like, this is the easy part, like recording an interview, sitting down. Like, it's not easy, but like, I do think anybody given 3 months could learn how to conduct an interview. The challenge is, how do you get the word out on the interview? How do you, like, TikTok is a completely different thing than Instagram, even though they're both video platforms kicking out the same system. But like, the engagement we have on political stuff on TikTok, like, we don't even get comments on Instagram on a lot of the videos, even if they're politically divisive. But on TikTok, there's comments, there's people arguing with each other, they're going back and forth. And then you compare that to LinkedIn, like, the way that I frame that conversation on LinkedIn is completely different. So like, the marketing piece, I would say, is a lot of what actually hosting a successful show is. This is like mandatory. You have to have good video, audio, have a good guest, and have a good conversation. That's baseline. Then it's, how are you getting the word out on it?
Cool. Quick audience poll. We are going long, but we're getting good stuff out of this, right? So we'll just keep plodding along, and I'm going to cut you off a little bit and just get rid of the Tim jokes. We're just power through. Okay. Wim Kirchhoff, who's in the audience and does all sorts of technical stuff. He does some podcasting for his church, as well as some for his companies. He sent me a note on LinkedIn the other day with this infographic: how to create a podcast with AI. And my initial snobbery AV, that's ridiculous. But if you dig into this, I'm curious, how much, if anything, are you doing with AI? So for example, topic ideation and research. Are you using any ChatGPT in your reach out emails?
Oh, like how to write the email? No, I just have a standard one, but I'm sure the first one I made sure there were no spelling mistakes.
But you have Rebecca GTP as well, right?
I do, yeah.
She helps you with that. But for example, using some things like Perplexity or to brainstorm ideas, etc. None of that?
And, like, it's important to note, like, if you're hosting, like, you on a microphone, like, there's so many different ways to host a show, right? There's how-tos where this may be very useful to cover a topic that might not be getting as much light. Like, I just do an interview show, but there are tons of different ways to listen to podcasts. There's different approaches. There's a person just explaining to you a topic and you just listen. There's people breaking stuff down. That might be very appropriate for those individuals.
Scripting and outlining, anything in that category?
No.
Recording and performance. So, for example, use tools like Podcast or Revoice for voice enhancement, pronunciation assistance. I do use something from Isotope, RX it's called, and I do run some base filters for leveling. So if the two people are slightly different volume, I'll run that. And then I will boost EQ with some AI tools. And that's super helpful. There's now some built-in stuff right in Adobe Premiere. They've incorporated their beta product, Adobe Podcast, and it's pretty amazing for repairing and removing background noise, etc. So there's definitely a role in post-production. And things like Descript, that was the initial one where you could take a video clip, run it through AI, it would give you a transcript, and then you could edit a video like you were editing a Word document. Pick this paragraph, cut, paste up here, and it would do that. But I know you do some tracking on your shorts in Adobe Premiere, and that's an AI tool, right? Basically, if you're trying to take a horizontal video and then center on that person over here and back over here, you can kind of pin on a nose or between the eyes, and it'll follow that around as you edit. And so I thought this was interesting, and thanks, Wim, for pointing that out, because there's tools everywhere. But what's cool about it is it should be no less than 60% human, 40% AI. It's not saying that you're just going to have the robots talk to each other and publish a video or an audio track. So, building a team. I looked back at your first interview with Jeff, and you were, I'm solo. I do it all myself, but that's relaxed over the years. So describe who's on your team.
You're on my team.
Yeah.
You've contributed a great deal. Rebecca's been the cornerstone of that since the beginning, and just going through and like somebody to support you when you're starting and believe in you and want to see you succeed. Like, again, as I said, $2,500 when you're a student and you don't really have a job is a huge risk to take during that period. And she trusted me with that, and that I was going to follow through, that I wasn't going to buy stuff and just kind of leave it on the shelf. She's done all of the social media stuff since the beginning. So I don't think that was even correct at the time that I had said that. She has always been the person doing the Instagram, TikTok, all of those posts. She's the one who's helped with the branding from the beginning. And so maybe that just went without saying at the time, but like that was an automatic that she was a supporter. You helping with design and making sure that the quality is there. We've really upped our quality over the years, designing that background. You do all of that to make sure that the background behind me looks really nice. Alex, our photographer back there, has been with me since the beginning and starting to get those thumbnail quality so that when we have big guests like David Eby, that we get a really clean photo that we can zoom in on and make sure that looks good. And then we've had like lots of support from people who are willing to listen, support, and tune in. And then we have Matei and Dasha from Call of Films, and they did all the videography, they did all the editing for those bigger interviews with people like Rick Hansen. They do kind of that putting together to make that look like a clean product from beginning to end.
Curious, how many hours a week do you have Alex following you around?
Not as many as you'd think.
By the way, these are all Alex's photos, and they're just fantastic. So give him a round of applause. He's also done all of the photos you find on Cowork Chilliwack, and we've really upped our photo game because of him. And so if you're looking for a photographer, that's your man. Consistency in publishing. And so I looked last year, you did 66 recordings here. In 2023. In 2024, you did slightly less, 45 recordings. And you do some on-location stuff with Métis and company. But what's your current take on that? Is it every week, every couple weeks you should be out there, once a month?
It depends. In the beginning, as I said, I was scared that I was going to stop going for no good reason other than life got in the way. And so I was running from that fear for 3 years of I just need to put something out. And so we did have some guests where I was like, that didn't really turn out the way I wanted it to, or that wasn't a crazy topic, but I was so committed to making sure that I hit my numbers and made sure that I was putting something out, because you need those 1,000 hours. And that's what that was to me. And now I'm a lot more relaxed. Rick Hansen's my last one that was posted January 1st. I haven't dropped anything since. I don't even have anything in the books yet. But as I said, I'm in talks with Christia Freeland. I have confidence now that I'm going to figure out what that run looks like. And then I go on a run and it's almost like a season. And then I take a breather and kind of regroup. If I have one that I feel like knocks out of the park, take a break, take a breather, and then get back to work figuring those things out. But I'm not as militant about it. But that was a me thing because I wanted to make sure I lived up to what I said I was going to do. With YouTube, it doesn't matter. You can go 3 months, 6 months, you can go 2 years without posting. You can have a brand new account. What YouTube does, and I think algorithms are important to understand, is it puts it out in front of 1,000 people. And it depends on whether or not 1,000 people click on whether or not you get put out to more people. And so YouTube gives you a fair shot. But if your thumbnail is not good, if your title's not good, if your first 5 minutes aren't good, then people are saying, I'm exiting out of this video. And YouTube goes, okay, people don't want to watch this. You're not being put in front of more people.
Mm-hmm. So advice that I've given folks because everybody wants to do a podcast until they realize how much work it is. But if you are going to start, do 6, do 10 in advance before you actually drop them, because you'll constantly feel that anxiety of, oh man, I got to get another one going. I got to get another one going. And so take 2 months and put those together and then start on the cadence that makes sense for you. Social media strategy, you've touched on that a little bit, but what are your go-to platforms these days?
LinkedIn is a huge one for really recognizable names. LinkedIn is huge. And again, it's about hitting your audience the day your video drops. So a week later, it doesn't matter if you had something go well. They're trying to decide whether or not people want to click your content. And so if you have a post on Twitter, a post on LinkedIn, a post if you're getting the word out that day and it gets a lot of clicks, YouTube's going to go, there's a lot of people from a lot of platforms wanting to see this video. We're going to put it out to more people in order for us, because YouTube's successful. They get more ad revenue if they're reaching more people with your video. So that's one piece of it. And then just figuring out what the topic is. So for politics, Twitter is always, or X is one of always my best places for political content. If there's a minister that said something that maybe what they shouldn't have said, that going on X is going to explode. If it's a thoughtful conversation on a complex topic, that's a LinkedIn world, because people are more interested in complex conversations and learning something in that realm. And then Facebook, if it's something local, Facebook is the place to go, because that's your friend group within your area that's going to be much more knowledgeable about some local person who came on than some person out of country. And I'm posting on Facebook, they're not going to know who that person is or be interested. So just figure out what that platform is and why you're posting on there.
And you've talked about the importance of shorts and how those are performing and stuff. So I think we can skip ahead. Sure. So moving into live events, This past year you actually did 4 of them, which is a pretty big undertaking. What did you learn?
That this is a great way to learn about your audience and learn and connect people. The big priority for Rebecca and I is we've been to a lot of events that we don't really feel like we fit in, or that we feel like flies on the wall, that we don't. And so my favorite part of figuring these events out has been, how do we make people feel comfortable, relaxed, and have a lovely evening? Because I think that hosting is a lost art. And so we do go all out. You've yelled at me so many times about how much money I put into these things. But I think we do need spaces where we can kind of come together post-COVID and be able to feel comfortable. So we're doing Jello shots, we're doing like Indian tacos, we're doing all types of unique things to just make people have like a memorable night that they can look back on in a year and go like, that was a fun night. I had a good time. And during the interview, I'm realizing what the audience is like super quiet about, and they're super engaged and they're wondering about something. Like you start to learn about what keeps people around. And when people start to shuffle and move and do things, you know you've lost their attention, that they're getting a little bored and they need to start to do something else or engage them in a new way. And then you start to see how people kind of connect with audiences and what they bring to the table, because each one of them, we took a different approach. Like we did an art show for Carrie Lynn Victor, and we had art set up throughout the whole space. With this one, we were able to have like a live talk show almost, and it brought such a different energy to it. And then music events, like that brings out such a different energy when you're switching from an interview to music.
Was it worth it? Will you do it again?
Absolutely.
Can we get that on the calendar, please? No, no, but they've been wonderful. And this space, right now we're about 28 people, which is awesome, but you cram it full and there's 60 people in here, including the balcony, and there's just an electricity to it.
65.
And yeah, he always oversells it. I'm like, dude, there's a fire code. We can't do this. And pro tip, if anybody's looking to do live events from going forward, I'm going to invite Chelsea to every single one of them. Growing your audience. So what are these proven methods to attract and grow your audience? What can you tell us about that?
I think that one's a more complicated one now, because there's certain things you do need to do. Like one thing that I've been notoriously bad at is you're supposed to ask people to subscribe at the beginning of the video, because people just don't think to do that, and they don't know that that's a free way to engage people. And I think the other piece that I would mention alongside this is figure out who else is in your space that you admire. So there's this guy, Stephen Bartlett, who hosts Diary of a CEO, and he will literally look directly into the camera and go, hey, we've noticed that 56% of the people tuning into our show are not subscribers yet. My promise to you is that I am actually going to continue to improve this, and that you can trust that each time I do this, the quality of this is going to continue to improve. That's a huge, of course I'm going to subscribe, well, because I trust you to deliver on what you just promised, but that's the deal you make. So that's really kind of the nuts and bolts on how you grow your audience, is you make a deal with them from the beginning. If I do a good job, I need you to like, subscribe, and comment. And if I do a bad job, you're free to leave, but that's my deal with you. And a lot of people don't know how much just subscribing makes a difference, because then YouTube goes, this is a trusted voice. We're going to put them out to more people in the future.
Just about done. There's just a couple more. So view stats. This is a tool created by Mr. Beast team. Anybody familiar with Mr. Beast? Yes, he's the most popular YouTuber in the world. He just retook that most subscribers. He's got 334 million subscribers across all of his channels. He's just shy of 500 million subscribers. So every video he puts out, he's disappointed if it doesn't get to 150 million views at this point. And so he had these private set of tools and recently put it out there. There's a free version, and I ran your podcast through view stats. Uh-oh. Are you prepared? And there's a pro package which helps with like doing killer thumbnails and so forth. But what I learned is he's predicting, or this tool is predicting, you'll hit 750 projected views in 82 days, and actually you're going to hit 1.8 million views based on your trajectory right now in 18 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can we get a round of applause now for reaching that, apparently?
And your stick-to-itness, you have this total views, your number 3,696,897.
Yes.
That's your ranking on YouTube, and you might go, wow, that's pretty far back in the line. But there are 113 million active YouTube channels right now, which puts you in the 3% highest viewed channels on YouTube right now.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's amazing. So, anyways, this is a cool tool. It's View Stats. Check it out. You can slice and dice and see how your longs are performing compared to your shorts and so forth. So, I'm curious. Share as much or as little as you want, but you've made a huge investment in this. It's in time, money, and so forth. But tell me about the returns have been, like from a professional standpoint, from a personal standpoint, and financial, if you want to.
Sure, yeah. So the podcast on average cost me about $20K per year in investment, and we've mostly broken even on that. The most recent years where we've been operating with you, I've been able to bring in sponsors like the Real Estate Foundation. They contributed like $5,000 and a few other grants that have been able to support.
Yeah, on that first one you had Enbridge.
Enbridge.
They sponsored all of the...
Yeah, Enbridge, what did they give? They gave like $10,000 or something like that to those 5 interviews.
And you haven't activated monetization on YouTube.
I have.
You
yeah,
have? Okay.
Yeah.
So you're getting some nickels there?
Pretty good. Well, like, okay, so for the Chris Sims, which is my highest viewed video, and it's got 78,000 views, that one probably grossed me about $1,000.
Okay.
And so like, it's nothing crazy, but that just allows me to, because if you move to the personal returns, like what I've learned from this, the doors this has opened, the self-confidence that this has provided me is well worth whatever I've spent on it. And the opportunity to like contribute to an election and ask, are you going to fire Bonnie Henry, to somebody who was talking about that, like to have that put on global news, to contribute in that way was like an honor to contribute, because nobody had asked him like point blank, what are you doing? And it's like, we get this in our head that like, he's not willing to answer that question. And then I just ask him and he's like, yes, that's my plan. If I get in, I don't think she did a good job on a number of fronts. I think there's some questionable things she's doing, but that's what my approach is going to be, being able to contribute. If I get to interview Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney and open those doors, like my contribution to Canadian culture is the thing that I'm going to be proud of, and that the return is.
Cool. You mentioned some white whales that you're trying to, in 2025, who is the bestest guest you're trying to get?
I don't know if anybody's going to know him. My dream guest right now is Dave Smith. I've been a huge listener of
Dave
his show.
Smith.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
You don't know who he is. But I've been following him. He's a libertarian, and just his breakdown on issues has been something that's fascinating to me. I'm going to throw shade. I've reached out to Jody Wilson-Raybould. We've had talks. She's not interested. And there are people out there in this space that just, what's the return for me? And like, those are people that I've wanted to interview, but you have to get your numbers up in order to convince some people. And like, Dr. Gabriel Maté has been a dream interview. You go onto his thing, it says how many subscribers, how many viewers, how many average listeners, how long are they tuning in for? What are your numbers on Instagram, TikTok? And like, they have a robust system to get through in order to get an interview. And those are the ones that are really, really tough to get. It's not usually the politicians, because they need a platform to speak. It's not usually the journalists. They have something to say. But it's the people who have kind of amassed enough of an audience to kind of be picky on who they want to speak to. Those are the people that it's like, I don't know how I'm going to get there unless we, apparently in 18 months, I start reaching these crazy numbers.
That's right.
To get access to.
Well, let's hear it for Aaron Pete. I went a good 35 minutes too long, but that's all good, right, folks? We learned a thing or two. Do come back. I really appreciate you coming out for this and share with others that we do this on a regular basis. And it's pretty easy to know the date. It's the third Thursday of the month. But ironically, not next month. On the third Thursday of the month, we're doing our annual Pecha Kucha. It's our 10th annual. And we've got 7 beautiful speakers lined up, and we're totally thrilled with that. So those are on sale. It's $15 to come, but all that money goes to the Chilliwack Community Film Fund, which helps fund students making films. And so, and we'll also be live streaming that one. It'll be a sellout. I do something where I'm in the host seat called Launch Stories. We do that on a monthly basis, and I do go an hour long with those. So this was tough to land in the 20 minutes, Jeff. I'm sorry, but check that out. We've got an amazing guest this Tuesday, Amal Anderson and Rob Hazel, thank you, Hazel, is our guest. He's the CEO of a 700-person Chilliwack-based company that is just doing amazing things. They repaired all the bridges that fell in the Coquihalla in a month to get it back operating during the floods and so forth. So I'm thrilled about that one. And do thank the Chilliwack Creative Commission. They filled your drinks tonight and were there for us, so thank you very much. And speaking of that, there's probably a few of those still on ice. And that's it. Wow. You're free.